The gun pressed cold against the back of Owen Zeller's neck before he even heard the man enter the barn. "Tell me where she is," the voice rasped, low and dangerous as a rattlesnake coiled in dry grass. "And I will make it quick for you." Owen did not move. His hands remained steady on the saddle he had been cleaning, the leather cloth still bunched in his fist. He had survived 3 cattle drives, a range war in the Texas Panhandle, and 2 years of drought that had broken better men than him. A gun at his neck was not going to make his hands shake. "Don't know what you're talking about," he said. "The woman. The one who rode in 2 days ago claiming to be your kin." The barrel pressed harder. "She is no cousin of yours, Zeller, and you know it. So does she. I just want to know if you care enough about the lie to die for it." And that was the thing that stopped Owen's heart cold. He did care. That was the betrayal he had not been prepared for. Not the lie itself, not the hidden motive behind those dark eyes of hers, not the secret she was still holding behind her teeth like a stone she was afraid to swallow. He cared about Opal Monroe more than any sane man should care about a woman he had known for exactly 48 hours. A woman who had ridden up to his gate with a forged letter and a story full of beautiful holes. And he had let her in anyway because something in him recognized her in a way that had nothing to do with blood. He turned slowly, making sure the man with the gun could see his empty hands. The stranger was lean and mean-looking, dressed in a dark coat that had seen better decades. A badge pinned crooked to his lapel that Owen recognized instantly as a Marshal star from the territory of New Mexico. His eyes were the color of dirty water and twice as cold. "You've got the wrong man," Owen said calmly. "Whatever she's done, she's got nothing to do with me." The Marshal's lip curled. "That is not what your ranch hand said." Owen filed that information away like a burning coal. Someone on his own land had talked. That meant the danger was not just at the door, it was already inside the walls. "Then you don't need me," Owen said. "You know where she is." "I know where she was," the Marshal said, and the correction carried the weight of a particular kind of fury. "1 hour ago she was in your guest room. Now the bed is empty and the window is open. So I am asking you one more time, Zeller, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer." Owen looked directly at the man. He let 3 full seconds of silence pass between them like a held breath. "I genuinely do not know where she is right now," he said. It was the truth. And the truth, delivered with steady eyes, was the most effective weapon Owen Zeller had ever learned to use. He had not always been this calm. 48 hours earlier, before Opal Monroe rode through the gate of the ZZ Ranch on a borrowed horse with a letter in her hand and a lie in her mouth, Owen Zeller had been a man who kept his world very small and very controlled. 31 years old. 2,000 acres of Colorado grassland that he had built from scratch after his father's death 6 years prior. A crew of 8 good men. A house with too many empty rooms. A life that ran like a well-oiled machine and felt, on most mornings, about as warm as one. He had not been expecting company on that Tuesday in October of 1882. The day had been ordinary until it was not. He had been out checking the fence line on the south pasture when Domingo, his oldest ranch hand, a compact and weathered man in his late 50s who had worked cattle from Sonora to the Dakotas, came riding up with a look on his face that sat somewhere between amusement and suspicion. "Boss," Domingo had said, pulling his horse alongside Owen's. "There is a woman at the gate." Owen had squinted at the horizon as though the answer might be written out there somewhere in the yellowing grass. "What kind of woman?" "The kind who says she is your cousin from Missouri." Owen had turned in his saddle and looked at Domingo for a long moment. "I don't have any cousins in Missouri." Domingo had nodded slowly, as if Owen had confirmed something he had already suspected. "That is what I thought you might say." They rode back to the gate together, and Owen saw her before she saw him. She was standing beside a sorrel mare with a white blaze, one hand resting on the horse's neck in a gesture that was half comfort and half something that looked like nervous habit. She was tall for a woman of the era, with dark hair pulled back beneath a cream-colored traveling hat that had clearly been purchased with some care and worn with considerably less. The hat had road dust on it. So did the hem of her skirt, a practical dark green wool that was cut for travel rather than sitting rooms. She carried a leather satchel over one shoulder and held a folded letter in her other hand. When she heard the horses approaching, she turned, and Owen got his first clear look at her face. He was not a man who was typically stopped by a face. He had learned early that beauty in the West was everywhere and also beside the point. You judged people by their hands, their eyes, and what they did when things went wrong. But there was something in her expression that arrested him before he could think to defend himself against it. Not beauty exactly, though she had that too, in a striking, unconventional way with sharp cheekbones and eyes that were the particular deep brown of creek water in shadow. It was the expression beneath the beauty, something watchful and exhausted and determined that he recognized from the inside out. She was running from something. He knew it the way you know the weather is about to change before the clouds even gather. "Mr. Zeller," she said, and her voice was steady as good rope. "My name is Opal Monroe. I am your cousin on your mother's side from St. Joseph, Missouri. Your mother and my mother were sisters." She extended the letter. "I have correspondence here from your mother that she wrote before she passed. She asked that if I ever found myself in need of help, I should come to you." Owen took the letter. He read it carefully. The handwriting was close enough to his mother's to be convincing. The language was warm and recognizable. His mother had been a woman of great generosity, and she might have written exactly such a letter. The problem was that his mother had been an only child. He had no aunt in Missouri. He had no cousin anywhere. He folded the letter and looked at Opal Monroe with the same steady neutrality he had used for the last 15 years of his life when he needed time to think. "Well," he said, "you had better come inside." Domingo said nothing, but Owen felt the man's eyes on him the entire ride back to the house, heavy with a question that was its own kind of answer. Owen showed her to the guest room himself, which was more than he typically did for visitors. He told himself it was because he needed to observe her without the distraction of having other people in the room. He told himself it was purely practical. He told himself a number of things as he walked beside her down the hall and pushed open the door to the clean, spare room that looked out over the eastern pasture. "It is not much," he said. "It is more than I was expecting," she said. And there was something raw in the honesty of that which he had not anticipated. He left her to settle and stood in the hall for a moment after the door closed, the forged letter still in his hand, wondering what in the name of everything holy he was doing. He was doing what his mother would have actually done, he realized. He was letting a person in trouble through the door because the doors of a decent house should open. The lie was irrelevant. The need was real. Anyone could see that. What he had not been prepared for was what happened at supper. He had a simple household. His cook, a widower named Franklin who made excellent biscuits and spoke very little, put food on the table at 6 o'clock every evening without fail. Owen ate alone most nights, or occasionally with Domingo when there was ranch business to discuss. He had set a second place at the table almost without thinking about it. And when Opal came down from the guest room, she had washed the road from her face and unpinned her hair long enough to rebraid it. And she sat across from him with a kind of careful posture that told him she was used to sitting at tables where she had to be very careful. For the first 10 minutes they ate in silence, which Owen found comfortable and Opal seemed to find unnerving in the way that silences always unnerve people who are carrying large secrets. She was watching him. He let her watch. "You know," he said eventually, reaching for the salt, "you don't have to keep inventing things to say. I am not expecting you to perform for your supper." She went very still. Then, "What makes you think I was inventing things?" "Because your mouth opens and closes about every 40 seconds and nothing comes out," he said, not unkindly. "Something keeps stopping you. Whatever it is, it can wait until you have eaten something. You look like you have not eaten a proper meal in 3 days." A pause. "4," she admitted. He slid the breadbasket toward her, and she took 2 pieces without embarrassment, which he respected enormously. They did not talk much that night, but they talked. He asked her about the road, and she described it accurately enough that he knew she had indeed come from the east. He asked her about the horse, and she said it was borrowed, which he could tell was true from the animal's equipment. He did not ask about the letter or the lie. He asked about her, which was a different thing entirely. She was 24 years old. She had grown up in Missouri. Her father had died when she was 16, and she had spent several years keeping house for a brother who was now married with children who did not need her. She had worked for 3 years as a seamstress in Kansas City. She spoke with the kind of careful precision of someone who had taught herself to be articulate, because no one had done it for them. None of this explained the forged letter, or the borrowed horse, or the 4 days without a real meal, or the exhaustion under her composure that went deeper than road travel. But it was the shape of a real person, and Owen listened to it the way he listened to the land, not for what was on the surface but for what moved underneath. After she went upstairs, he sat in the parlor for a long time with his coffee going cold and thought about what he was going to do. The next morning he was up before sunrise as always. He had been through the east pasture and back before breakfast, and he was standing at the kitchen pump when he heard her behind him. She had come down early too, which surprised him. She was dressed again for travel, satchel over her shoulder, and she stopped when she saw the look on his face. "I should go," she said. "I have imposed enough." "You have not imposed anything," he said. "Sit down and have breakfast, Mr. Zeller, Owen." He said it flat, without thinking, and then was mildly surprised at himself. He had not offered his first name to a near stranger in years. "And I am not asking you to stay out of obligation. I am asking because I have questions and you have answers, and it seems simpler to work through them over eggs than through the door while you are trying to leave." She hesitated in the doorway for 3 full seconds, which was long enough for him to wonder if she was going to run. Then she set her satchel down against the wall and sat at the kitchen table. Franklin made eggs and did not comment on anything, which was one of the many reasons Owen kept him. "The letter," Owen said, pouring coffee for both of them. "It is very good. Whoever wrote it knew my mother's voice well enough to be convincing." Opal wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and did not say anything. "The handwriting is not hers, though," Owen continued. "She pressed harder on the upstrokes. Whoever wrote this presses harder on the downstrokes. It is a small difference." Silence. "I do not have any cousins," he said. "My mother was an only child." He looked at her. "I knew before you finished your first sentence." She met his eyes and he watched something shift in her face, something complicated and tired and brave. "Why did you let me in?" she asked. "Because you needed in," he said simply. The look she gave him then was one he would remember for the rest of his life. It was the look of a person who has spent so long being a problem to be solved that they have forgotten what it feels like to be a person who is simply seen. "Who wrote the letter?" he asked. She looked out the window. "A woman in Abilene who knew your mother years ago. She told me things about her, details I could include to make it convincing. She meant to help me." And you needed convincing details because you needed a reason to be here specifically? A nod. Why specifically here? She turned back to him. Her jaw was set with a determination that looked like it cost her something. Because you have a reputation, she said, for being fair, for being the kind of man who does not ask unnecessary questions. Owen considered this. And yet here I am asking questions. These feel necessary, she said quietly. He leaned back in his chair. Who is following you? The breath she took was visible. A long, careful intake, the kind that people make when they are deciding how much of the truth will serve them without giving everything away. A marshal named Cutter, she said. Everett Cutter, out of New Mexico Territory. What does he want? He believes I have something that belongs to someone he works for. She paused. Not the government. The badge is real, but the orders are not. He is working for a man named Gerald Pratt. Owen was quiet for a moment. The name was not unfamiliar to him. Gerald Pratt was a land agent out of Santa Fe with a reputation for acquiring property in ways that required significant creative interpretation of both law and morality. Several ranchers in the territory had found themselves on the losing side of deals with Pratt's organization in the past 5 years. What do you have that belongs to Pratt? Owen asked. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded document and set it on the table between them. Owen unfolded it carefully. It was a deed. A land deed for a property in northern New Mexico, 430 acres with water rights attached, recorded in the name of a man called Thomas Monroe. The signature at the bottom was notarized and dated 3 years prior. Your father? Owen asked. My father, she confirmed. He died 8 months ago. The land passed to me. Gerald Pratt has been claiming since before my father was cold in the ground that my father owed him a debt and that the land was promised to him as payment. She looked at the deed. It was not. My father owed Pratt nothing. I have the original deed and I have a letter from my father's attorney confirming the land is mine free and clear. Pratt has been pressuring me through every legal and illegal channel available to him for 8 months. When his lawyers stopped working, he sent Cutter. Where is the attorney's letter? In my satchel. She pulled it out and placed it beside the deed. Owen read both documents. He was not a lawyer, but he had dealt with enough land transactions to read a deed clearly. Everything she said appeared to be true. The deed was legitimate. The attorney's letter was legitimate. The only thing standing between Opal Monroe and her 430 acres of northern New Mexico was a corrupt land agent with a purchased lawman at his disposal. He looked up at her. She was watching him with the same expression she had worn the night before, watchful and tired and carefully hoping. Why Colorado? He asked. If the land is in New Mexico and the trouble is in New Mexico, why run to Colorado? Because Pratt's reach in New Mexico is very long, she said. I needed somewhere outside his immediate reach while I arranged the next steps. I needed to reach a judge in Denver, a federal judge who is not connected to Pratt's network. I have a name. She produced a third document from the satchel, a letter of introduction from someone in St. Joseph. Judge Howard Alden. He sits in Denver. If I can get before him with these documents and testify, Pratt cannot touch the land. And you thought if you came here as my cousin, Owen said slowly, Cutter would have a harder time dragging you off my property without a legitimate legal order. A woman traveling alone is easy to dismiss, she said, and the bitterness in her voice was a lifetime's worth of experience compressed into 8 words. A woman visiting family is slightly harder. A woman on the property of a known and respected local rancher, with a connection however invented to the community, is considerably harder still. Owen was quiet for a long time. He looked at the documents on the table. He looked at her. He thought about his mother, who had been a woman who knew what it was to need help and not be sure it would come. "It is a good plan," he said finally. She blinked. "I'm sorry, the plan. It is a good plan. The execution has some weaknesses, but the strategy is sound." She stared at him. "You are not angry about the letter?" He picked up his coffee. "I told you. I knew before you finished your first sentence. I made a choice to let you in regardless. The lie was yours to tell. The choice was mine to make." Opal Monroe looked at him for a long, still moment, and then something behind her eyes shifted in a way that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with the much more dangerous and complicated territory of trust. "What are the weaknesses?" she asked. "The borrowed horse is a problem. Anyone looking for a woman on the run will notice a horse that doesn't match the ranch's string. We'll put it in the barn with the others and tell Domingo it's a new acquisition." He set down his cup. "The guest room is at the front of the house, visible from the road. That needs to change." "You are helping me," she said slowly, as though she was testing the words for traps. "It appears so," he said. "Why?" The word came out rough, stripped of performance or calculation. It was a genuine question from a genuine person who had been operating in a world where nothing was free. Owen thought about it honestly, because the question deserved honesty. "Because you came to my gate with a lie built out of necessity, and I can respect that. Because what is being done to you is wrong, and I have the ability to make it less wrong. Because my mother would have done the same without blinking." He paused. "And because I believe you." She held his gaze. "You hardly know me. I know you came for days without eating before you knocked on a stranger's door," he said. "I know you put a plan together that was good enough to fool most people even though you were exhausted and scared. I know you know enough about my mother to have done real research, which means you don't do anything halfway." He stood up, taking his coffee cup to the counter. "That's more than I know about most people I have known for years." He heard her exhale behind him. It was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, and it was the most honest sound he had heard in a very long time. That had been yesterday morning. Now, it was 24 hours later, and there was a marshal's gun at the back of Owen's neck in his own barn. And Opal Monroe was somewhere out in the Colorado grassland at dawn, having apparently climbed out a window. And Owen was going to have to be very careful about the next 30 seconds. He moved slowly and deliberately, keeping the marshal's attention on him. "She is gone then," Owen said, with the tone of a man being mildly inconvenienced. "I cannot help you with that." "You can tell me which direction she went," Cutter said, "or I can arrest you for harboring a fugitive." "On what charge is she a fugitive?" Owen asked. "Owning land that someone else wants." The muscle in Cutter's jaw jumped. "There is a warrant." "A warrant signed by whom?" Silence. The specific kind of silence that told Owen the warrant's legitimacy was something Cutter did not want to discuss in detail. "You will show me the warrant," Owen said, turning slowly around to face the man now, "or you will get off my property. Those are your options, Marshal." Cutter held the gun level. Owen looked at it with the calm of a man who understood risk clearly. Shooting an unarmed rancher on his own land in a county where Owen Zeller was known, and Cutter was not, would be the end of Cutter's ability to move freely in Colorado. The man was dangerous, but he was not stupid. After a very long moment, Cutter lowered the gun. "I will be back," he said. "Bring proper paperwork when you come," Owen said. "My door is open to the law." He listened to Cutter's horse leave the yard, then counted to 60 before he moved. Then he walked to the south end of the barn, past the tack room, and knocked 3 times on the grain room door. There was a beat of silence. Then Opal's voice, steady as a wire fence. "Is he gone?" "Riding toward town," Owen said. "You can come out." The door opened, and she emerged from behind the feed sacks, where she had been sitting in the semi-dark with her satchel on her knees. and her jaw set like she had been ready for whatever came next. She was wearing her traveling clothes and her hair was loose, and there was a particular kind of fierce composure on her face that made Owen's chest do something inconvenient. "I heard you come into the barn," she said. "I did not know it was you until I heard the voice behind you. Smart of you not to come out before you knew." "I was not entirely sure you would not hand me over," she said. "It was not an accusation. It was the honest statement of someone who had learned not to assume." "I told you I would help you," he said. "People say things." She looked at him steadily. "And then other things become more convenient." He held her gaze and understood what she was saying. She had been let down before, significantly and repeatedly, and the fact that she had trusted him enough to hide in his barn rather than run into the open was already more faith than she gave most people, and she needed him to understand how much that cost her. "I know," he said quietly. "I will not let you down." Something in her face went very still, the way things go still just before they change completely. Then she nodded once, crisp and decided, and said, "We need to get to Denver." "We leave at first light tomorrow," he said. "Before Cutter gets back with whatever paperwork Pratt can manufacture." "You said we," she pointed out. "I did. This is not your problem." "It is now," he said with a finality that closed the argument before it opened. He turned toward the barn door. "Come inside. Franklin made breakfast and you need to eat." He did not look back to see if she was following, but he heard her footsteps behind him, and they were the steadiest sound he had heard in a long time. At breakfast, Domingo was already at the table, which was unusual. He looked up when they came in and then looked at Owen with the expression of a man who has been waiting to have a particular conversation. "Someone talked to the marshal," Owen said, sitting down. "Before Cutter came to the barn this morning." Domingo nodded, slow and heavy. "It was young Cole," he said. "The new hand. He came to town 2 nights ago and Cutter must have found him in the saloon." Owen was quiet for a moment. Cole Hardin had been working the ranch for 6 weeks, brought on for the fall roundup. He was 20 years old and naive in the way that young men in saloons around men with badges sometimes become naive. "He did not know better," Owen said. "He did not know what he was doing." "He did not," Domingo agreed. "I already sent him to work the far pasture today." "He will not be in town again." Owen nodded. He looked across the table at Opal, who was listening with her coffee cup held in both hands, processing the information. "The man who came to the barn," she said. "Cutter. He is gone for now," Owen said. "But he will find paperwork or manufacture it by tomorrow. We need to move before he gets back." Domingo looked at Owen. "I am coming with you. You are needed here." "Miguel can run the ranch for a week," Domingo said, referring to his nephew who worked the north pasture. "You should not ride to Denver with only 2 of you." Owen started to argue and then stopped, because Domingo was right. 3 was more defensible than 2 on a 4-day ride through country that Cutter could move through as freely as they could. "All right," he said. Opal was quiet for a moment. Then she said to Domingo, "Thank you." Domingo looked at her with the particular careful regard of a man who had seen a great many things in his life and trusted his own judgment about people. "You are welcome, Miss Monroe," he said. "Whatever you need to hold on to it. We will get you to Denver." The rest of that day was preparation. Owen checked over the horses, the 3 best in the string, and repacked his saddlebags with the kind of focused efficiency that came from years of trail work. He added a rifle to the scabbard and a second revolver to his kit, without discussion. He told Franklin to expect them back in 10 days, and to give Cole no information about where they had gone. He sent Domingo to the hardware store in town for supplies under a mundane cover story. At some point in the afternoon, he came into the house, and found Opal at the kitchen table with her documents laid out in front of her, going through them with the systematic attention of someone preparing for a fight. The deed, the attorney's letter, the introduction to Judge Alden, a small notebook in which she had been making notes in a precise, careful hand. He stood in the doorway for a moment watching her work. She had a particular quality of concentration that silenced everything around her. She was entirely elsewhere, inside the problem, turning it over and looking at each face of it. He had worked with men who had that quality, the ability to be completely present in a task, and he had always found it impressive. Finding it in her was something more complicated than impressive. She looked up and caught him watching, and the moment held for exactly one beat too long before they both looked away. "Is there anything missing from the documents?" he asked, coming in and sitting across from her. "I want to write a summary," she said. "A clear, organized account of everything that has happened, with dates and names. Something the judge can read before I speak to him so that when I walk in, he already has the shape of it." "That is smart," he said. "You have ink and paper I can use." He brought them from the study, and he sat across from her as she wrote. And occasionally she would ask him a question about legal language or the specific geography of New Mexico territory. And he would answer what he could, and they would fall back into the near silence that was quickly becoming the most comfortable kind of quiet he had known. Outside, the light was doing what Colorado light does in October, going gold and long across the grass, and the shadows of the cottonwoods by the creek stretched east across the yard. It was the kind of evening that usually left Owen with a vague, unnameable ache that he had spent several years trying to decide, was loneliness or simply the natural consequence of too much open space. Tonight it did not ache. He noticed this, set it aside, and went back to looking at nothing in particular while she finished her summary. At dinner, Domingo joined them, and the conversation was more relaxed than the previous evenings, partly because the pretense was gone and partly because Domingo had the gift of making a table feel inhabited. He told stories about cattle drives and Owen contributed facts, and Opal asked questions that showed she was genuinely interested and not just performing politeness. She knew more about cattle and land management than Owen would have expected, and when he said, so she told him that she had spent 2 years helping manage her father's New Mexico property before his health declined, and she had needed to take work in the city. "So the land is not abstract to you," Owen said. "It is my father's work," she said. 400 acres that he built from nothing. He came to New Mexico with $30 and a horse and spent 30 years making something out of dry land. She paused. "I will not let someone take it, because they have more money and fewer principles than he did." There was a quiet fire in her voice when she said it, steady and hot, the kind that does not flare and die but burns low and constant. And Owen thought that Gerald Pratt had badly underestimated this woman if he thought exhaustion and intimidation were going to extinguish that. Domingo raised his coffee cup in a small, serious gesture of acknowledgement. Owen did the same. Opal looked at them both, briefly surprised by the solidarity, and something crossed her face that was private and profound and quickly controlled. They left before the sun was fully up, in the gray hour when the world is all shapes and no colors. Owen rode the gray gelding he called Pike. Domingo rode his own bay mare, and Opal was put on the best horse in Owen's string, a steady chestnut called Dollar, who had never spooked in 5 years of use. She mounted without help and adjusted her stirrups herself, and sat the horse with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in the saddle, which made sense given what she had told him about her father's land. They rode north and west, keeping off the main road for the first several hours, taking the old grazing trails that Owen knew from years of working the land. The morning was cold and clear, the frost still on the grass in the low places, their breath visible in the early air. No one talked much for the first 2 hours, which was comfortable and necessary. You do not talk much when you are listening for hooves behind you. By mid-morning they had put enough distance between themselves and the ranch that Owen judged it safe to join the main northward road. The country opened up around them, the mountains beginning to rise in earnest to the west, the plains going wide and pale gold to the east. It was beautiful in the way that large, indifferent country is beautiful, tremendously, and without any particular interest in being appreciated. They stopped at noon at a creek crossing to water the horses and eat from the saddlebags. Opal sat on a boulder with her food in her lap and looked at the mountains and said, almost to herself, "I forget how big it all is." "Easy to forget when you are looking at documents," Owen said. She looked at him, a slight thing, almost a smile, not quite. "You are very practical," she said. "Is that a criticism?" "No," she said. "I find it reassuring, actually. Most people use a great deal of words to not say things. You use very few words to say exactly what you mean." "Efficient," he said. "There it is again," she said. And this time it was a smile, small and real, and it changed the whole architecture of her face in a way that he registered clearly and immediately moved on from, because there was a corrupt marshal potentially on their trail, and this was not the time to notice anyone's smile. Domingo was watching the road behind them with professional attention and said nothing. But Owen was aware of the quality of silence that existed around Domingo, specifically the kind of silence that Domingo used when he was being carefully and deliberately unobtrusive. And Owen recognized it as the silence of a man who had noticed something and was choosing not to remark upon it yet. They made good time. By nightfall they had covered significant ground and stopped at a way station that Owen had used on cattle drives, a small outpost with a barn and a bunkhouse run by a family named Ash. The woman of the house, Clara Ash, was a practical and incurious woman who asked nothing about who they were or where they were going and charged a fair rate for the stall space and the use of the bunkhouse. Owen paid for 2 rooms, the second for Opal, and Domingo rolled his blanket in the bunkhouse corner with the philosophical ease of a man who has slept in considerably worse places. After the horses were settled and supper was done, Owen was standing in the yard looking at the stars, which were abundant and close in the mountain air, when he heard the door behind him and knew from the footstep that it was Opal. She came to stand beside him, not close, a respectful distance, looking up at the same sky. "You think he is following us?" she asked. "Cutter," Owen considered it. "He may be. He does not know which route we took. If he went back to the ranch first, Franklin will give him nothing and he will lose half a day. If he went straight for Denver, he might be ahead of us. What happens if he gets there first and gets to Judge Alden before we do? Then we deal with that when we get there." He paused. "Alden is a federal judge. His authority sits above whatever Pratt can manufacture in the territory. If your documents are in order, which they are, Cutter showing up first only delays things, it does not end them." She was quiet for a moment. "You researched Alden?" "After you mentioned him, I sent a letter yesterday morning. I know someone in Denver who can tell me whether a man is trustworthy." She turned to look at him, and in the starlight her expression was that particular combination of surprise and wariness that he was beginning to recognize as her default response to being treated as though her needs were worth the effort of solving. "You sent a letter to verify my information," she said slowly. "To verify the judge," he said. "Not your information. I verified your information with the documents." "There is a difference, significant one," he said. "You I believed." I just needed to make sure your contact in St. Joseph had not given you a compromised name." She was quiet for a long moment. The stars were very bright. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses shifted in its stall. "My father used to say," she said carefully, as though the words were something she was handling with respect, "that you could tell a great deal about a person by what they verified and what they took on faith." "What does he mean by that?" "He meant that people who verify everything are looking for reasons not to trust, and people who take everything on faith are not really paying attention." She looked back at the sky. "But someone who takes the person on faith and verifies the circumstances, that is someone who knows the difference between trust and carelessness." Owen was quiet, because that was the most precise description of his own approach to the world that he had ever heard from another person's mouth. And hearing it articulated that clearly, by her, in the dark, with the cold air moving off the mountains and the stars burning overhead, was a startling thing. "He sounds like he was a good man," Owen said finally. "He was the best person I knew," she said simply. "Which is why I will not let his land go to someone who would not recognize what it cost to build it." They stood there for another few minutes, not saying anything, and the silence between them was not empty. It had weight and warmth, and a kind of companionable ease that Owen had not felt in longer than he could honestly quantify. Then she said good night and went inside, and Owen stood in the yard for another few minutes alone, looking up at the stars and thinking very carefully about nothing in particular. The next morning they were on the road again before full light. The second day's riding was harder, the terrain more varied, the road climbing and descending through country that required more attention from the horses. They moved at a steady pace and Domingo rode at the rear, keeping his eyes on the country behind them. Around mid-afternoon of the second day, Domingo came up beside Owen at a canter. "Two riders," he said, "a mile back, moving the same direction." Owen did not look back. "How long since the crossing at Elm Creek?" "An hour." They rode on for another 10 minutes. Then Owen called a halt at a wide bend in the road where the scrub oak grew thick on both sides. He turned his horse sideways and waited. The two riders came around the bend 3 minutes later, and Owen relaxed incrementally when he recognized them. The first was a man named Walt Sorrell, who ran a horse ranch 20 miles east of Owen's land and had no interest in Pratt or New Mexico land disputes. The second was Walt's son, a young man of about 22. They were heading north to Denver for the fall stock sale. The encounter lasted 15 minutes, included a fair amount of the usual information exchange that ranchers do when they meet on the road, livestock prices, and weather forecasts and mutual acquaintances. And Owen made careful mental note of the fact that Opal handled the introduction of herself with easy naturalness, answering Walt's questions about who she was with the comfortable vagueness of someone who has had practice not being notable. She said she was a relative of Owen's riding north on family business, and Walt Sorrell took this at face value because there was no reason not to. After Walt and his son rode on, Domingo moved up beside Owen and said, very quietly, "She is good at that." "She has had practice," Owen said. "That is not always a good thing," Domingo said, and then immediately added, "I only mean that a person should not have to practice surviving." "No," Owen agreed, "they should not." He found himself, over the next hour of riding, doing something he was not typically inclined to do, which was imagining a past. Not his own past, which he knew clearly enough, but hers. A woman who was 24 years old and had been learning since childhood to take up as little space as possible, while simultaneously fighting for the things that mattered. A woman who had taught herself to read a room the way Owen had taught himself to read weather, because in her world, getting it wrong had consequences. He thought about what she had said about verifying circumstances versus taking people on faith. He thought about the 4 days without food. He thought about the loan of the letter, the research into his mother, the careful and intelligent strategy of the borrowed identity. And he thought that everything she had done was the product of a mind that was fighting with whatever tools it had available. He respected it entirely, and it made him furious on her behalf in a way that he had not expected. That evening they stopped at a trading post on the edge of a small settlement, where they ate a hot meal that was not Franklin's cooking, but was substantial and warm. The trading post had a long table, and several other travelers were eating there. A family heading west with a loaded wagon, 2 miners heading south, a young couple who were clearly recently married and looked somewhat overwhelmed by the continent. Owen and Opal and Domingo sat at one end of the table and ate without attracting particular notice. But at some point during the meal, when the conversation at the table had drifted into the kind of communal background noise that settles over a shared meal among strangers, Opal said something quietly to Owen that was for him alone. "Tell me something about you," she said. "Not about the ranch or the cattle or the plan. Something true that you would not tell most people." He looked at her. The candlelight from the table's central lamp was doing something to the shadows on her face that he was trying not to look at directly. "That is a large request," he said. "You know more about me than almost anyone living," she said. "It feels unbalanced." He thought about it for a long moment, turning the options over. He was not a man who volunteered inner life to people he did not know well. He was not sure when Opal had moved from the category of not well known to the category of something else, but he was beginning to suspect it had been earlier than he had registered at the time. "I have not been inside a church in 6 years," he said. "Not since my mother's funeral. I know people expect it from a man who runs the land the way I run mine, but I keep not going and I keep not being able to explain why in a way that satisfies anyone." She was quiet, listening. "I think it is because my mother was the reason I could be in those rooms," he said. "After she was gone, the rooms felt very large and very empty, and I could not find what was supposed to fill them." Opal was quiet for a long moment. "That makes a great deal of sense," she said. "Churches are communities. You lost your person in that community." "Something like that." "My father and I used to read the Bible together on Sunday mornings," she said. "Since he died, I cannot open it without hearing his voice on every page." She paused. I stopped too. The candlelight moved. Outside, the wind was picking up from the northwest. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and was answered. "Grief does strange things to the familiar," Owen said. "It makes some things impossible," she agreed, "and other things suddenly very clear." He looked at her, and she was looking at him, and the something that had been building between them quietly since that first morning in the kitchen was very present in that candle-lit moment in a way that neither of them addressed directly, because they were both, in their different ways, careful people. But it was there. It had weight. It was real. The 3rd day on the road was the most dangerous. They had been riding for about 2 hours when Domingo dropped back and then rode forward fast enough to tell Owen something had changed. "Cutter," Domingo said low. "Ahead of us." He and another man, waiting at the crossroads. Owen processed this quickly. If Cutter was ahead of them on the road, he had gone direct to Denver and then come back out when he got word of their direction. Which meant either he had someone sending information, or he had been there when Walt Sorrell passed through Denver, and Sorrell had mentioned seeing Owen and a woman on the road, innocently and without understanding the significance. "How far?" Owen said. "A 1/4 mile. There is a stand of pine between us and them. If we turn here, we can take the old mining trail east and come back to the main road north of the crossroads." Owen looked at Opal. She had heard everything and her face was set and focused, not panicked, calculating. "The mining trail," she said. "How long does it add?" "3 hours," Owen said. "Maybe 4. "Do it," she said. They turned off the main road before Cutter could see them. The mining trail was rough and slow, winding through terrain that was harder on the horses and required careful picking of the way. But Domingo knew it well from years of working the country, and they moved with as much speed as was reasonable. It was on the mining trail in the mid-afternoon, with the sun coming through the pines in long, slanted columns, that Owen's horse went slightly lame. Not badly, not a break, but a stone bruise on the left front that made Pike move carefully and reluctantly. Owen dismounted immediately, checked the hoof, cleaned it, and remounted. But he could feel the horse was not right, and he kept the pace easy and watched the footing. An hour later, when they stopped to rest the horses, Opal came up beside him while Domingo was checking the trail ahead. "How is he?" she asked, looking at Pike. "He will be all right," Owen said. "I need to keep him slow for the rest of today." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Owen." He looked at her. She had used his name naturally, without the self-conscious precision of someone being careful. It was the first time, and it landed with more weight than the word usually carried. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. I know I have said it before, and I know it is inadequate, but I need you to know that I understand what you are risking." "I am not risking much," he said. "You are risking your ranch's relationship with local law, your reputation, possibly your safety," she said steadily. "For a woman you met 3 days ago who lied to you when she arrived. You needed to lie," he said. "And I chose to risk. Those are both true simultaneously. Most people would not make that choice. Most people are not me," he said, and then realized how that sounded and added, "I only mean I know what I am capable of and what I am willing to do. I have not done anything outside those boundaries." She studied him for a moment with that dark, careful gaze. The pine light was on her face. He was not looking away from it this time. "What are you willing to do?" she asked. It was a real question, not rhetorical. "A fair amount," he said quietly. "More than I expected." Something shifted in her expression. The wariness was still there, because it was always going to be there. It was built into her, but underneath it something was opening carefully. The way a hand opens slowly when it has been holding something tightly for a very long time, and is not entirely sure yet whether it is safe to let go. Domingo came back before either of them said anything else, reporting the trail was clear, and they rode on. They made Denver on the evening of the 4th day, coming in from the south with the mountains in the last light behind them and the city spreading out in the flat basin below. Denver in 1882 was a real city, with gas lighting and brick buildings and a train station, and all the noise and density of a place that had grown fast on the back of silver and cattle. Coming in off the trail with road dust on everything, and the particular silence of the open country still in their ears, it felt disorienting and loud. Owen knew Denver reasonably well from cattle business. He knew a hotel on Larimer Street that was clean and respectable and asked no inconvenient questions, and he took them there directly. 2 rooms again, Opal's on the 2nd floor in the interior of the building, away from street-facing windows. Domingo went immediately to inquire after Cutter's location, with the ease of a man who knew how to ask questions without appearing to ask them. Owen and Opal stood in the hall outside their rooms for a moment before separating for the night. "First thing tomorrow," Owen said. "We find Judge Alden's office," she nodded. "I wrote out everything on the trail today. The summary is complete." "Good." A pause. The hallway was dim and quiet, the sounds of the city coming muffled through the walls. "I am not sure I have slept properly in 8 months," she said. It was said simply, without complaint, just a fact she was acknowledging. "Sleep tonight," he said. "Tomorrow you have a federal judge and documents that prove your case. Tonight there is nothing more to prepare." She looked at him for a moment. Then she put her hand out, not to shake but just briefly, lightly, the back of her fingers against the back of his. A touch so brief it might have been accidental, except that it was entirely deliberate and they both knew it and neither of them said anything about it. "Good night, Owen," she said. "Good night, Opal," he said. He stood in the hallway after her door closed and looked at the back of his own hand for a moment, and then went to his room. Domingo came back an hour later with news. Cutter had arrived in Denver 2 days ago. He had been to the federal courthouse and had spoken with a clerk. He had not yet seen Judge Alden directly. He was staying at a hotel 3 streets over. "He is moving fast," Domingo said. "So are we," Owen said. They were at the federal courthouse at 9 o'clock the following morning. Opal had prepared herself with the same focused care she brought to everything, dressed in the best of what she had in her satchel, which was a dark blue traveling dress that was practical and dignified. Her documents organized in a leather folio that Owen had acquired for her the previous evening at a shop on Larimer Street. Judge Howard Alden's office was on the 2nd floor of the courthouse, a substantial room with a great deal of oak furniture and the smell of law books and pipe tobacco. The judge himself was a man in his early 60s with the kind of face that has been weathered by decades of listening to people tell him things that were true, things that were false, and the far more common category of things that were both simultaneously. He looked at Opal for a long moment when she was introduced, and then at Owen, and then at the letter from St. Joseph. Then he sat down and said, "Tell me everything." Opal told him. Owen listened. He had heard the story from her twice now, but he heard it differently this time, in a formal setting with the documents laid out on a judge's desk. He heard the shape of it differently. A woman alone, a land she had inherited honestly, a network of corrupt influence arrayed against her, 8 months of systematic pressure and intimidation, the borrowed horse and the forged letter, and 4 days without food. He heard how much she had endured before she knocked on his gate. He heard the weight of it, and he felt something in the region of his chest that had no practical application to the problem at hand, but that was undeniably present. The judge read the documents. He asked questions. He asked Owen 2 questions, whether he had examined the deed himself and whether in his estimation the attorney's letter was legitimate. Owen answered both precisely and affirmatively. Then the judge was quiet for a long time. "Gerald Pratt," he said finally. "You know him," Owen said. It was not a question. "I know of him," the judge said carefully. "He has appeared at the edges of several cases in this court over the past 3 years. He has never appeared in the center of one." He looked at Opal. "Until now, potentially." Opal held his gaze. "I only want my land, Your Honor. I want what my father built to be protected. If that also brings Pratt's practices into the light, I do not consider that a bad outcome." The judge looked at her with the expression of a man reassessing something. "Marshall Cutter was here 2 days ago," he said. "He presented a claim that you had taken documents fraudulently from Gerald Pratt's business office." Opal's jaw tightened. "I took nothing from Pratt's office. The deed and the attorney's letter were in my father's possession until his death and came to me with his effects. I can provide letters from my father's attorney in Santa Fe to confirm this." "You have them." She reached into the folio and produced them. She had everything. The judge looked at the additional letters, then put them all together into a careful stack. "I will need to verify the Santa Fe attorney's standing and correspondence," he said. "This will take 3 to 4 days." "We understand," Owen said. "In the meantime," the judge said, looking at Opal, "do you have somewhere safe to stay?" She is under my care, Owen said. She will be safe. The judge looked at him with the measuring expression of a man who has spent 40 years evaluating character. Whatever he saw appeared to satisfy him. He nodded. They were leaving the courthouse when they came around the corner of the second-floor hallway and stopped. Cutter was coming up the stairs. He saw them at the same moment. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Cutter put his hand toward his coat, and Owen stepped in front of Opal with the calm deliberateness of a man placing a physical fact in the universe. And Domingo stepped to Owen's left, and the 3 of them formed a wall in the hallway of a federal courthouse in Denver. "You are in a courthouse, Marshal," Owen said, "with a federal judge 20 feet behind that door and a building full of court officers. Whatever you are thinking about doing, think carefully." Cutter's hand stopped moving. His face was controlled fury, the kind that comes from a man who is very good at his work but is running out of legitimate options. He looked at Opal behind Owen's shoulder. "This is not finished," he said. "It is with Judge Alden," Owen said. "Go talk to Pratt. Tell him the documents are in a federal judge's possession, and the case is under review. Tell him it is finished in Colorado." Something moved through Cutter's expression, a fracture line of calculation. He was processing. Owen watched him do it and knew the moment the man decided. Cutter stepped back. He went down the stairs. He did not look back. Owen let 3 breaths go by before he moved. Then he turned to Opal. She had not stepped back when Cutter appeared. She had stayed directly behind him close, and she had not made a sound, and she was standing very still now with her folio against her chest and her face pale but composed. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am fine," she said. Then, "You stepped in front of me." "Yes," he said. "You did not think about it." "No," he said. She looked at him with an expression that he could not entirely read, which was unusual because he had become better than he expected at reading her. It was something layered and private and warm, and she did not put it into words, and he did not ask her to. Domingo said, "I would very much like something to eat," and the tension broke into something almost like laughter. The 4 days in Denver, waiting for the judge's verification, were the strangest and most unexpectedly good 4 days that Owen had spent in years. He knew Denver, but he saw it differently with someone beside him who was seeing it fresh, and Opal had the quality of genuine curiosity that made ordinary things interesting. They walked. They ate in proper restaurants and had coffee in the mornings at a small establishment on Larimer that had real china cups and a newspaper to read. Domingo disappeared into Denver's considerable and thriving community of Mexican and Spanish descent, and emerged each evening cheerful and with excellent information about local events. They talked. This was the thing Owen had not expected. He had expected logistics and planning, and the specific conversation of people with a shared practical problem. He had not expected the kind of talking that happens between people who are genuinely interested in each other's minds. She had read more than he had, which he found immediately interesting rather than threatening. She had opinions about things that were not the conventional opinions of the era, expressed with the precise care of someone who has learned to pick the right audience for unconventional thinking. She was funny, which surprised him slightly and then stopped surprising him, because the same intelligence that made everything else about her work made her wit work too. On the second evening, walking back to the hotel through the lit streets, she said something about the city that made him laugh, genuinely and without performance, and she turned to look at him when he laughed as if she had not entirely expected that sound from him and was pleased to have caused it. "You have a very good laugh," she said. "I have been told it is infrequent," he said. "That makes it more valuable," she said, "not less." He looked at her in the gaslight of Larimer Street, with the city moving around them, and thought, with the sudden clarity of something that has been true for a while and is only now being acknowledged, that he was entirely and completely in love with this woman. The thought arrived without drama and without the expected terror. It arrived like a door opening into a room that had always been there. He did not say anything. Not yet. The timing was wrong. Her case was not resolved. She was not free. And whatever he felt needed to wait until she had what she came here to get, because she deserved to make every choice going forward from a position of freedom rather than gratitude or circumstance. He kept it to himself and went on walking beside her, and the gaslight was very warm. On the fourth day, Judge Alden summoned them to his office. He sat behind his desk with the documents arranged in front of him with the careful order of a man who has made a decision and is prepared to explain it. The Santa Fe attorney is legitimate and well regarded, he said. His correspondence with your father goes back 11 years. The deed is recorded properly in the territorial records. The attorney's letter is unimpeachable. He looked at Opal steadily. The land is yours, Miss Monroe. It has always been yours. I am issuing a formal federal order today confirming the title, and specifically enjoining any further claim by Gerald Pratt, or any agent acting on his behalf. Cutter's warrant is not recognized by this court, as it was issued under county authority in New Mexico on the basis of claims I am now finding to be without merit. The room was very quiet. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am referring Gerald Pratt's activities to the federal prosecutor in Santa Fe for review. Based on what you have described, and what I have been able to verify in 3 days of inquiry, Pratt's operations merit significantly more scrutiny than he has received. Opal put both hands flat on the edge of the judge's desk and looked at the document he was sliding toward her. The order, the federal confirmation, the end of 8 months of being hunted. Owen watched her read it. He watched her read it twice, slowly, and he watched the moment she reached the end of the second reading and understood that it was real. Her eyes closed briefly. When she opened them, she was looking directly at Owen, and the expression on her face was not triumph. It was something deeper and quieter and more profound than triumph. The look of a person who has been carrying something that was never theirs to carry, finally being able to set it down. Thank you, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was steady. Thank your documents, the judge said dryly. They did the work. Outside the courthouse in the October sun on the Denver street, the three of them stood on the steps for a moment. Domingo looked at the sky and said, I would like to go home. Owen looked at Opal. She was holding the folio with the federal order inside it against her chest, looking at the mountains to the west, and she looked like a person who has just realized they can breathe properly for the first time in a long time. What happens now? Owen asked her. She turned to look at him. I need to go to New Mexico, she said. I need to go to my father's land and file this order locally and make sure Pratt's people understand it is over. That will take time to arrange, Owen said carefully. Yes, she said. You will need somewhere to stay in the meantime. She looked at him with those dark eyes, and the wariness that had been her default expression for the entire time he had known her was still there, but it was different now. It was mixed with something that he recognized, because he had been carrying the same thing for 3 days without speaking it. The ZZ Ranch, she said, seems to be the natural place. It does, he said. It has a good guest room. I know, she said. I've used it. You could have a different one, he said, and something in his voice was not quite steady, which was new because Owen Zeller's voice was always steady. One that stays regardless of whether your business here is finished. She went very still. The mountain air moved between them. Owen, she said, "I know the timing is not," he began. "The timing is fine," she said with a directness that was entirely her and that stopped his sentence cleanly. "The timing is exactly right. Everything before this was necessary and now it is done, and I am telling you the timing is fine." Domingo was extremely interested in a building across the street. "I love you," Owen said. He said it simply and directly, because it was true, and he was a man who said true things plainly. "I know that is a large thing to say after 4 days. I have never said it with less uncertainty in my life." Opal Monroe looked at him on the steps of the federal courthouse in Denver, Colorado, in October of 1882. With the mountains behind him and the land deed in her hands and 8 months of struggle at her back, and she said, "I knew by the second morning. When you brought me the ink and paper without asking why I needed them." He stepped toward her, and she stepped toward him at the same moment, and he took her hands, the folio and all, between both of his, and she looked up at him. "Come home with me," he said. "I will," she said. "With considerable pleasure." Domingo turned around from the building across the street with the expression of a man who has been waiting for this conclusion for several days and is satisfied to see it arrive. They rode back south the next morning, the three of them, and the road that had felt urgent and watchful on the way north felt entirely different going home. The country was the same. The mountains were the same on the western horizon. But the weight of pursuit was gone from it, and in its place was something that Owen had not felt about a long ride in a very long time, the feeling of being on the way somewhere that was genuinely worth going. Opal rode Dollar with the ease she had from the first day, and they talked as they rode. The kind of conversation that does not have a subject exactly, but is the natural output of two people who have discovered they like being in each other's company. She told him more about the New Mexico land, the water source, the specific kind of soil on the north section that was particularly good for the kind of grazing she had in mind. She had plans, real plans, built on her father's foundation. He listened to them the way he listened to good engineering, with the appreciative attention of someone who understands the work behind it. He told her about the ranch, not the business of it, which she had already absorbed efficiently in 4 days, but the less practical things. Where he had planted the cottonwoods by the creek and why. The particular quality of the eastern pasture in early spring. The room in the house he had never quite finished furnishing because he had never been sure what it was for. She said, "I might know what it is for." "Tell me," he said. "After I have seen it," she said. He smiled, looking at the road ahead, and Domingo, riding slightly ahead of them, made no comment whatsoever. The ranch came into view on the 4th afternoon of the return journey, its familiar lines against the Colorado sky, the cottonwoods by the creek catching the last of the day's light in shades of deep yellow. Coming back to it after a week away, Owen felt the particular affection for a place you have built yourself that is the closest thing he knew to being moved by something. He glanced at Opal. She was looking at the ranch with an expression he had not anticipated. It was not the polite appreciation of a visitor. It was the look of someone recognizing something. "It is beautiful," she said quietly, and she meant it the way you mean something about a place that fits some shape inside you that you did not know was waiting to be filled. Franklin met them in the yard and said nothing about anything except that supper was in an hour. Cole Hardin was gone, having been quietly let go 2 days after they left, which Domingo confirmed without drama. The rest of the crew had kept the ranch running without incident. That evening at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where it had started 9 days earlier with a forged letter and a shared pot of coffee and a decision that had changed the shape of everything. Opal spread out the New Mexico land documents again, and Owen sat across from her, and they began planning what came next. What came next was correspondence with the Santa Fe attorney. It was the filing of the federal order in the appropriate New Mexico Land Records office. It was a series of letters that went out over the following weeks and came back confirming step by step that Pratt's attempted claim had been officially extinguished and that the land was incontrovertibly Opal Monroe's. Each letter was read at that kitchen table with coffee between them, and each step forward was acknowledged with the quiet satisfaction of people who do not celebrate before the work is done. During those weeks, Opal settled into the ranch with a naturalness that surprised everyone, including herself. She worked. She was not a person who could stay idle, and she inserted herself into the daily operation with a practical competence that the crew adapted to quickly and without resentment, partly because she was good at it, and partly because she approached them with the direct respect of someone who knew what skilled labor was worth. Domingo said to Owen one morning with the expression of a man stating an obvious fact, "She belongs here." Owen said nothing, but he agreed completely. He courted her the way he did everything, directly and without performance, which suited her exactly because she had no patience for indirection and a great deal of patience for honesty. He was at the kitchen table when she was there. He walked the property with her. He asked her questions about the New Mexico land and listened to the answers. He brought her coffee without being asked after the third day because he knew how she took it. He read the newspaper in the evenings, and sometimes would read aloud the things he found interesting, and she would do the same from the book she was reading. And the evenings took on a shape that was its own kind of declaration. He kissed her first, 3 weeks after they came back from Denver, on an evening when the first real snow of the season was coming down outside the parlor window, and the fire was going, and she had been reading aloud something funny, and was still laughing when she looked up and found him looking at her. And the thing that had been building since that first morning in the kitchen was simply too present to continue to be left unspoken. It was not a tentative kiss. He was not a tentative man. She responded without hesitation, with the directness that was the most characteristic thing about her, and when they separated she looked at him steadily and said, "I was wondering when you would get around to that." "I was waiting for the timing to be right," he said. "The timing was right 3 weeks ago," she said. "I was being careful," he said. "I noticed," she said. "I also noticed that you are done being careful." "I am," he said. "Entirely." She smiled at him, the full version of it, the one that changed her whole face, and he thought that this was what that room had been waiting for, the unfinished room in the house, and also that some things you cannot know until they arrive and change the shape of everything. He asked her to marry him in December, on a clear, cold evening when the mountains were white to the base and the stars were extraordinary. He asked her on the front porch of the house with the lantern light through the window and the whole silent winter country spread out before them. And he asked her simply, without elaborate ceremony, because she was a person who valued truth, and he wanted the question to be as true as he could make it. She said yes before he finished asking, which made him laugh, the real laugh she said she valued, and she said, "I told you I knew by the second morning," and he said, "I told you I knew before I kissed you," and she said, "We are both apparently very slow at saying things," and he said, "I am going to spend the rest of my life correcting that," and she said, "Good." They were married in March of 1883, in the small church in town that Owen had not been inside since his mother's funeral, which he returned to without difficulty, because Opal was beside him, and the room did not feel large and empty anymore. It felt inhabited and right. Domingo stood with Owen as witness. The pastor who married them was a practical man who did not embellish. The vows were the traditional ones, and they said them looking at each other with the kind of attention you give things that matter completely. The town turned out more than Owen expected, because Owen Zeller was a fixture of the county and a man people respected, and because Opal Monroe had become known in the 10 weeks before the wedding as exactly the kind of woman that a community of hardworking people recognizes when they see one. The afternoon after the wedding, when the guests had eaten and the gathering was winding down in the comfortable way of good parties that know how to end, Owen and Opal stood on the porch of the ZZ Ranch together and looked at the property. "It is ours now," she said. "Not mine, not yours. Ours." "It always will be," he said. In April, Opal made the trip to New Mexico to see to the final in-person filing of the land records and to spend a week on her father's property. Owen went with her, which she had not expected and which moved her in ways she expressed simply and directly, in the way she expressed everything. They stayed in a small house on the property, and Owen walked the 430 acres with her and understood, in that visceral way of a man who has built land himself, exactly what Thomas Monroe had made of nothing over 30 years. It was good land. It was thoughtfully managed land. It was a legacy. Standing on the north section with the particular good soil she had mentioned, Opal said, "I want to work it eventually. When things are stable, I want to run some cattle here." "You could integrate it with the Colorado operation," Owen said. "The grazing cycles would complement each other. Summer in Colorado, winter seasons here." She looked at him. "You have already been thinking about this." "Since you described the soil on the trail ride," he admitted. She shook her head slowly, smiling at the mountains. "We make a practical pair." "Extremely," he said. "Is that romantic?" she asked. "I think," he said, coming to stand beside her, "that building a life together is the most romantic thing there is. The feelings are the beginning. The building is the whole story." She took his hand without looking at him, just reached sideways and put her hand in his, the same way he had reached for her without thinking on the courthouse steps. Instinct. Recognition. The gesture of people who have become essential to each other. They stood there on Thomas Monroe's land in the April sun, and it was warm and wide open and entirely theirs. Gerald Pratt's operation in New Mexico was investigated by the federal prosecutor in Santa Fe beginning in the spring of 1883. The investigation, which Judge Alden had set in motion, uncovered a pattern of fraudulent land acquisition across 3 territories that resulted in formal charges against Pratt and several associates the following year. Everett Cutter, who had been carrying water for Pratt under the cover of a legitimate badge, lost his marshal's position and faced separate charges. Owen Zeller received a letter from the federal prosecutor's office acknowledging his assistance in the matter, which he kept in the study desk without particular display. Opal filed it with the other documents. She kept everything. Their first child was born in December of 1883, a boy they named Thomas, for Opal's father. He arrived in the blue December dark with the snow coming down outside and Franklin making tea in the kitchen and Domingo waiting in the parlor with his hat in his hands, and the patience of a man who knows that important things take the time they take. When Owen came out to tell him, Domingo looked up and saw his face and said simply, "Good." "Thomas," Owen said. "He looks like himself already." "They always do," Domingo said. Owen went back to Opal, who was exhausted and magnificent, holding their son with the same focused attention she brought to everything. And he sat on the edge of the bed and looked at both of them and felt something that was too large for any language he knew how to use, so he did not try. He just put his hand against her face, gently, and she leaned into it, and Thomas slept. In the spring of 1885, their second child arrived, a girl named Ruth, for Owen's mother, and she was a person of considerable opinion from the first week, which Domingo found endlessly entertaining, and which Owen found completely unsurprising given her parentage. The unfinished room in the house became Thomas's room when he was old enough to want his own space. Ruth appropriated the small room at the end of the hall with such decisive certainty that no one suggested any alternative. The integration of the New Mexico land into the ranch operation took 3 years to develop properly, with seasonal cattle movements that required logistical coordination and good relationships with the territory between the two properties. Owen and Opal made the trip south together twice each year, and the 430 acres of Thomas Monroe's land thrived under management that combined his daughter's knowledge of its specific qualities with Owen's operational experience. In the evenings at the ZZ Ranch, when the work was done and the children were in bed and the fire was going in the parlor, they read. They talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that has nothing empty in it, the kind that is its own form of conversation between people who know each other at the level where words are not always the most direct route. One evening in the winter of 1886, Opal looked up from her book and said, "Do you ever think about the letter?" Owen looked up. "The forged one." "Yes," she had a small, private expression. "I was so certain you believed it. I had spent so long on the details." "The handwriting," he said. "The handwriting," she agreed, shaking her head. "You were not far wrong," he said. "The letter was very good. Another man might have believed it entirely. But not you, but not me." She looked at him. "What would you have done if you had believed it?" "If you had thought I was genuinely your cousin," he thought about it. "Exactly what I did," he said. "Let you in." She was quiet for a moment. "And if I had been a legitimate cousin, then I would have fallen in love with you in the most inconvenient possible way," he said. She laughed, genuinely, the full laugh that was one of the things he loved most in his known world. "I was already in love with you before I rode through your gate," she said. "The woman in Abilene who knew your mother told me about you. She told me you were the kind of man who your mother would have been proud of. I thought that was the most important thing anyone could say about a person." Owen was quiet. "What was this woman's name?" "Clara Hume," Opal said. "She had a shop in Abilene. She was very kind." Owen thought about it. He did not know Clara Hume, but he knew the description. He knew the particular standard of being someone your mother would be proud of, because it was the standard he had tried to hold himself to since she died. "Tell her she was right if you ever write to her," he said. Opal smiled at him. "I will tell her." Outside, the Colorado winter was doing what Colorado winters do, coming down hard and white and covering everything equally and without distinction, the way weather does not know about human arrangements and does not care. Thomas would grow up knowing what his mother had done to protect his grandfather's land. He would grow up knowing that his father had let a person through the door because the doors of decent houses should open. He would grow up knowing both of these things as equally true and equally important, and when he was old enough to ask about it, sitting at the kitchen table where all the important conversations of that house took place. They would tell him everything: the letter, the 4 days without food, the gun in the barn, the trail to Denver, the judge's desk. And Ruth, who missed nothing and forgot nothing, would listen from the hallway even though she was supposed to be in bed. And she would understand that the best stories do not begin at the beginning. They begin at the moment of most consequence, and everything before that was just the road that got you there. The road that got them there had been rough and crooked and full of people who wanted to stop them. But they had ridden it, the 3 of them in the beginning, and come out the other side into something that expanded with each year into more than either of them had planned for when they stood on the courthouse steps in Denver with the mountain light and the city noise and everything to lose and everything to gain. In 1887, They added a third child, a boy they called James, who had Owen's quiet temperament and Opal's eyes and who spent his entire childhood trying to keep up with his older siblings, which served him extremely well as preparation for everything that came after. Domingo was present for all of it. He worked the ranch until he was too old to work it at a useful pace, and then he sat on the front porch and supervised, which was its own form of essential work. He watched Thomas learn to ride and Ruth argue about everything, and James follow his brother across every fence on the property. He watched Owen and Opal in the way he had always watched them, with the satisfaction of a man who had been present at the beginning of something true, and had never had any doubt about where it was going. He said once to Owen when they were sitting on the porch in the last good years of Domingo's health, "I knew on the day she arrived." Owen looked at him. "The day she rode through the gate, the way you looked at her when she was still 50 yards out," Domingo said. "You did not know you looked at her that way, but I did." Owen thought about it, 50 yards out before he could see her face clearly, before she had said a word. He thought about what Opal had told him, that she had been in love with him before she rode through the gate, based on a description from a woman in Abilene. "We were both already gone," he said. Before it started, Domingo agreed, with the philosophical satisfaction of a man who has always trusted his own judgment about the things that matter. The ZZ Ranch stood for decades afterward, its reputation building through the territory and beyond as a place run with integrity and competence, which was the only legacy Owen had ever wanted. The New Mexico land remained in the Monroe name because Opal had fought for it under that name, and she chose to keep it that way, a decision Owen respected entirely. And Thomas inherited it when the time came and worked it exactly as his grandmother's daughter had shown him, with knowledge and care and the long patience of someone who understands that good land, like good people, rewards those who attend to it honestly. But all of that was later. Right now, in the parlor of the ZZ Ranch on a winter evening in 1886, with the fire going and the snow coming down outside and the children asleep upstairs, Owen Zeller set down his book and looked at the woman across from him who had ridden through his gate with a forged letter, and the most important and beautiful lie he had ever seen. And he thought, as he thought every day in some form or another, that the best thing he had ever done in his life was to let her in. She looked up from her book and caught him looking at her and did not need to ask what he was thinking because she knew, she always knew. "Come here," she said. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the sofa, and she closed her book and leaned against him. And outside the Colorado, winter was vast and white and indifferent to everything. And inside the house, it was warm and full.